Well, let's back up a little bit. We left off here. Likewise, notice a statement by Robert Dott, whom we quoted from earlier, the author of the textbook that I was taught from. This is the author of this article that I'm typing from. In his presidential address to the Society of Economic Paleontologists and Mineralogists, he says, writing in GeoTimes, "I hope I have convinced you that the sedimentary record is largely a record of episodic events rather than being uniformly continuous." Now, the term episodic basically means catastrophic. Episodic is just one of those examples. As Ropp said, to avoid using that term, catastrophic, but we understand what he means. An episodic, as opposed to a uniformly continuous explanation of the geologic record, he says. My message is that episodicity is the rule, not the exception. We need to shed some light, we need to shed those lingering subconscious constraints of old uniformitarian thinking. From these statements, you can see that there has been a change towards catastrophism in the thinking of the geologists. They don't want to admit it, so they use up other words, but we already know what they're talking about. A very dramatic illustration is seen in John Horner's book, Digging Dinosaurs. He found thousands of dinosaur bones up in Montana, and he writes in this book, judging from the concentration of bones in various pits, there were 30 million fossil fragments in that area. At a conservative estimate, we had discovered a tomb of 10,000 dinosaurs. There was a flood, which Horner indicates was what placed the fossils the way he observed them, all kind of floating in one direction, as if down a stream, all dead, drowned. How about catastrophic flood worldwide? There was no ordinary spring flood from one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation, or the sheer immensity of it. Now, he's not talking about the Noahic Deluge. He is a firm, thoroughgoing evolutionist, so he doesn't want to even consider that. He surmised that volcanic activity catastrophically killed and buried all those dinosaurs, with a local flood coming along later on to deposit them, as he observed them in place today. But when we look at the rock record in this place and other places that he studied, it is obvious that it was a great flood that produced this, not a local one. When you find the bones oriented north and south, as I said, all in one direction, north and south though, and segregated small from large, it's very obvious that this was done by a large water flow, depending upon density, sphericity, and size, actually. These dinosaurs grouped together based on that, and the fact that they all kind of flowed together, but they were probably all mixed because the worldwide flood kind of swirled them all and mixed them all together. But they flowed according to sphericity, density, and amorphous shapes, of course, would be on the top, and sphericity presents the least water resistance, so they sink faster, and density, of course, they're first to sink. And when you have it over such a huge area, and you have 10,000 dinosaurs involved in just one place in that area, you have a huge catastrophe. And just that one area, throughout the entire area, immense. He continues saying, that's our best explanation. It seems to make the most sense, and on the basis of it, we believe that this was a living, breathing group of dinosaurs destroyed in one we use the word catastrophic moment. Still wants to make it local, though. Now, these are his terms, the terms of an evolutionist. And as we saw from Dott, this is not the exception, this is the rule. Now, they still cringe at thinking it was all done by one giant flood. It gets too close to God, Creator. It's too close to implications that they want to avoid. But when we look at the evidence, we see more and more that it is imperative that we not place these layers of rock millions of years apart. That's part of the implications of the discoveries at Glenrose. Instead of fossils being millions of years apart, we find them together, out of order. Notice that, for example, the implications of the evidence seen at the Grand Canyon. Here at the bottom, we find the Moave limestone. Directly above it, we find the Redwall limestone. But the Moave is the bottom layer of that geologic column, the Cambridge era. Now, 200 million years above that, we find the Mississippian era. We find the Cambridge era on the bottom of the canyon and the geologic column. Then, there are a number of intervening eras from hence layers of rock that are supposed to be there, according to the evolutionists, but we are told that the erosion occurred throughout the canyon and that we go directly to the layer of red wall limestone, the Mississippian era, skipping over 200 million years. But then, when you look at it, the interface between the two layers of limestone that are supposed to be 200 million years apart, the line between the red and lighter colored limestone is straight as an arrow and level for hundreds of miles. Well, if there's any disruption, the huge catastrophic billions of tons of pressure, and it's just gently down. Now we know what erosion does, even hundreds of years erosion. It doesn't leave straight and level surfaces, so much the more 200 million years of erosion. But that's not the worst problem. As we examine the edge, we notice the Moab, the Cambrian, but then a little layer of the red wall, and back to the Moab, and then to the red wall, and then back to the Moab, and then to the red wall, and then to the Moab, some 6 times. How do you skip 200 million years 6 times? No, you don't. These are interbedded. Now, when you learn Steno's axioms, you know that when you find layers that are interbedded, that they're not millions of years apart. They are contemporaneous. They had to be laid down together. There is no way to escape that conclusion. The entire column is one great catastrophic event, and that is the best explanation. It fits the facts. Dr. Don Patton. Tape number 3. We're warned by David Raup about this when he says, one of the ironies of the creation-evolution debate, at least he admits to it, is that the creationists have accepted the mistaken notion that the fossil record shows a detailed, orderly progression. And they have gone to great lengths to accommodate this fact into their flood geology. Oh, boy. You can't win, can you? David Raup, professor of geology, University of Chicago. He, of course, points out that there is no such thing. And you don't have to have an explanation for a detailed, orderly progression because it does not exist. He readily acknowledges that. It is a mistaken notion, as he tells us. Well, Dr. Patton has some notes, too, that I recorded. He says, a large number of well-trained scientists outside of evolutionary biology and paleontology have unfortunately gotten the idea that the fossil record is far more Darwinian than it is. This probably comes from the oversimplification inevitable in secondary sources, low-level textbooks, semi-popular articles, and so on. And also there is probable some wishful thinking involved. In the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. And since they didn't, they made them up. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. David Raup. What we see when we look at the fossil record is billions and billions of dead things and rocks laid down all over the world. We're living on a veritable graveyard. Billions of dead things and rocks laid down by water all over the world is eloquent testimony to the fact that there was a great catastrophe. Dr. Don Patton. The millions of fossils that we see in the museums around the world and in the rocks provide convincing proof, this is from his tape, for creation, certainly evidence that would sustain that concept. Let's begin with a statement made by S.M. Stanley, paleontologist from Johns Hopkins. He says, it's doubtful whether, in the absence of fossils, the idea of evolution would represent anything more than an outrageous hypothesis. The fossil record, and only the fossil record, provides direct evidence of major sequential changes in the Earth's biota. These people say this stuff. Wow. S.M. Stanley, Johns Hopkins. I hope you'll remember the statement that it's just an outrageous hypothesis if you don't have the fossils. I think he's absolutely right. And I think the evolutionists, the evolutionists, don't. There is direct evidence for creation that's provided here. If evolution is true, then we should see the simple, slow beginning, gradually increasing in complexity over time. It's not visible. On the other hand, if creation is true, then we should see a sudden and complex beginning and a wide variety of creatures from the start. And we do. Let's begin as we look at what the facts are with a statement by Stephen Jay Gould, perhaps the best known paleontologist in the United States today. That was in 1989, writing in his recent book, Wonderful Life, published in 1989. He says, in a geological moment near the beginning of the Cambrian. Cambrian is that bottom of the layer at the bottom of the geological column where life appears in fossil form at first and nothing below it. Nearly all modern phyla made their appearance here. The 500 million subsequent years after have produced no new phyla. When you get to that point, which is a beginning, an explosion, as he calls it, in the same article, you have nearly all of the modern main divisions of life forms that we have in biology, all in that first rock strand at the bottom. And there have been no new phyla since then, only twists and turns upon established designs, he says. Now, we had the basic design in place in the geological moment in the beginning of the Cambrian, right at the bottom of the geological column. Below that, no life. Compare another quotation from Stephen Gould from Dr. Patton's notes. One outstanding fact of the fossil record that many of you may not be aware of, that since the so-called Cambrian explosion, during which essentially all the anatomical designs of modern multicellular life made their first appearance in the fossil record, no new phyla of animals have entered the fossil record. Stephen Gould, Harvard. Consider the statement made by Preston Cloud and Martin Glessner, authors of major textbooks in geology written in Science. They say, ever since Darwin, the geologically abrupt appearance and rapid diversification of early animal life have fascinated biologists and students of Earth history alike. Its abrupt appearance, its rapid diversification, in other words, many different diverse kinds in the beginning. Does that sound familiar? In the beginning, God created. There you go. Compare quotations from Dr. Patton's notes. The remarkably complex forms of animals we see today suddenly appeared. This moment, right at the start of the Earth's Cambrian period, marks the evolutionary explosion that filled the seas with the Earth's first complex creatures. This is Genesis material, gushed one researcher. Demonstrates that the large animal phyla of today were present already in the early Cambrian and that they were as distinct from each other as they are today. A menagerie of claimed cousins, sponges, segmented worms, and other invertebrates that would seem vaguely familiar to any scuba diver. Richard Monastersky, Earth Science Editor, Science News, Discover Magazine. And we find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution the very first time they appear. It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian era is divine creation. What else are you going to say? Because if it wasn't created, then it had to evolve. Because you ask Sir Isaac Newton, it's devolving. Richard Dawkins, Cambridge, The Blind Watchmaker. This interval, plus early Cambrian, was the time during which Metazoan life, a more than one cell, diversified into nearly all of the major phyla and most of the invertebrate classes and others subsequently known. Not only do we have nearly all of the major divisions, but we have nearly all of the smaller divisions of classes and other orders right from the early part of the Cambrian, defined by them as the beginning of the major diversification of life. Now, prior to the Cambrian, we have some little green algae and some bacteria. H.S. Ladd, University of California, Davis, put it this way. He said, most paleontologists today give little thought to fossiliferous rocks older than the Cambrian, thus ignoring the most important missing link of all.